Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. My name is Zachary Strong and I am a physicist, psychology researcher, biblical scholar, and philosopher. And today I'm going to be talking to you about why most philosophy is an absolute waste of time. Most philosophy is an absolute waste of time. And at the end of the video, I'm going to share with you some resources on how you can become a true philosopher. So without further ado, we'll just jump into it. Most philosophy is an absolute waste of time, and most people engaged in philosophy are not actually engaged in logical thinking. They are engaged in narcissistic self-justification. And I'll explain to you why. So this is going to be a bit of a lengthy explanation. I'm going to try to get through it as fast as possible, but what we're going to do is we're going to start off with a quote from Friedrich Nietzsche, and then we are going to examine how modern philosophy operates. Okay? So the quote from Friedrich Nietzsche comes from Beyond Good and Evil. It has gradually become clear to me what every great philosophy up till now has consisted of, namely the confession of its originator, and a species of involuntary and unconscious autobiography, and moreover that the moral or immoral purpose in every philosophy has constituted the true vital germ out of which the entire plant has always grown. So in this quote, what Nietzsche is saying, as he says in most of his philosophy, is that a lot of things going on in Western thought are based on people's opinions. Nietzsche is famous for looking at Christian theology and religious thought and saying, hey, this is all just opinion. Like, there's no proof here. It's just opinion, right? And he's famous for looking at political ideologies and other ideologies and ways of thought and saying, hey, this is all just opinion, And so that's kind of what Friedrich Nietzsche is famous for, is he's kind of the first person to drop that bomb on Western society. And the interesting thing is he's right. And I'm going to show you how he's right, especially in context of modern philosophy in our generation. So in order to understand why he's so correct on this, we have to look at philosophy as a whole, okay? And in philosophy, there are 5 different branches of philosophy, generally. You have logic, okay? And logic kind of forms the foundation for all philosophy. So, there's logic. But then there's 4 other branches of philosophy. You have epistemology, which is the study of how we know something is true. You have metaphysics, which is the study of reality. Then you have aesthetics. And people think that aesthetics has to do with beauty, but really aesthetics has to do with values, what we value, what we think is important. In the same way that an artist will have a foreground in their painting and a background, they choose to emphasize certain things and de-emphasize certain things. That's aesthetics. It's choosing what to make important, what to emphasize in your life or in an artwork or anything. Okay, and it's really the study of values. Now, after that, you have ethics, which is what we do based on what we value. Okay? Now, what you have to do if you want to actually do proper philosophy, you have to engage with these 4 branches of philosophy in a certain order. Okay? You have to start with epistemology. You have to ask yourself, how can I know something is true? What methods can I use in order to arrive reliably at the truth? And then once you've worked out your methods, then you can move to metaphysics and figure out what the world is like. What is true about the world? Once you figure out what is true about the world and you know what's going on, then you can take a survey of what you know and say, okay, based on what I know and what I've learned about the world, what should I value? What is important in life or elsewhere? Okay, what is important? And then once you figure out what is important, then you can move to ethics, which is what you should do based on what is important. If you want to have a proper philosophical thought and a well-ordered mind, you have to engage with philosophy in those four branches in order: epistemology, metaphysics, aesthetics, ethics. You have to move through that progression. And the problem with philosophy in general, especially modern philosophy in our generation, is that the people in philosophy departments who teach philosophy, they don't do this. They don't do this. Okay? And then the people who are online as influencers and so on, usually they represent a certain camp, like Christian apologists, okay? Like Jay Dyer, Sam Shamoon, Michael Jones, these folks, they're in a certain camp advocating for a certain position, okay? They haven't necessarily gone through these four steps: epistemology, metaphysics, aesthetics, ethics. They haven't necessarily done that. Okay, they're just advocating for their position using philosophy. Okay, liberal commentators, conservative commentators, same thing. They're in their camp, they're trying to win elections, and they are using philosophy as a weapon in order to justify, their position and their viewpoint. It's not actual philosophy. It's not actual philosophy. Okay, and especially in the university departments that claim to teach philosophy, they aren't doing this. They aren't going through epistemology, metaphysics, aesthetics, ethics. Okay? And I'll show you how this is the case. Okay? So on the wall behind me, you can see my engineering physics degree. Okay? I actually did a double major in engineering physics and business and a minor in mathematics. And since then, I've become a scholar of multiple disciplines, and a bunch of my findings are on my YouTube channel and my website. It's all open source, okay? So I'm technically a scientist. Now, in our world, especially our generation, there's so much science available. Scientists have discovered so much about the world. It's incredible. Okay? And they've discovered so much in all sorts of different fields. Okay, like psychology has made a bunch of many really good discoveries. People studying archaeology continue to find new things every year. Okay? Which affects our understanding of history. So history is an evolving discipline. Okay, psychology, history, archaeology, physics. I can attest to, as a physicist, physics continues discovering new things. Right? Biology continues discovering new things. There's so much out there which tells us what the world is like. Okay? Now, in order to engage with that body of work, scientific work, archaeological work, or whatever, first you have to understand epistemology, things like the scientific method. You have to understand how scientific discoveries are made. You have to understand how to discern good science from bad science, speculative psychology from grounded psychology. You have to be able to do that. And in order to be able to understand the epistemology of science, there are just certain books that you have to read. There's a certain kind of education that you need, which I received as an engineering physicist. Okay? You need to be able to understand how to engage with science so you can actually understand what you're looking at, And just as a highlight, for example, these are 3 books that I would recommend. Okay, Consilience, The Unity of Knowledge, by biologist Edward O. Wilson. The Structure of Scientific Revolutions by Thomas Cohen. And also just a general philosophy book, Philosophy Who Needs It by Ayn Rand. Okay, these 3 books are the beginning of the table stakes you need in order to understand how science works, especially a messy science like psychology. If you haven't read The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, you will not be able to understand psychology or the history of psychology. You won't be able to understand the methodological issues with the field right now. You won't be able to understand any of it, right? And that book is just one of several works, right? So anyway, that's the baseline table stakes. Reading Consilience, reading The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, that is like the very beginning of the table stakes that you need to meet in order to engage with science. Okay, and most people, I'm guessing, you, the viewer, and so on, you probably haven't read those books. No offense to you, you probably didn't even know they existed. If I go to the Department of Philosophy at McMaster University and I say, hey, and I go up to professors and I say, hey, have you read Consilience? Have you read The Structure of Scientific Revolutions? There's a good chance they will say no. They'll say, no, I study Kant. I study Schopenhauer. I haven't read The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. Okay? So philosophers and the people that teach philosophy, they have not properly engaged with epistemology. Okay? Which is the first step in a proper philosophical thought. They don't understand epistemology. Okay? But the problem gets deeper. Because as I've mentioned, scientific knowledge in psychology, biology, physics, history, archaeology, and so on, knowledge has proliferated. There's a lot to understand about our world. And so if you want to be a philosopher, you need a working knowledge in a bunch of different disciplines. Okay? If, for example, if you are philosophizing about anything related to society, you need a working knowledge in psychology, neuroscience, sociology, anthropology, history, and economics. You need a working knowledge in all of those things, if not a graduate level knowledge. Okay? That's like 4 master's degrees in a variety of fields. If you want to do any philosophy related to religion, as is popular on YouTube, you essentially need a master's or a PhD in comparative theology before you even begin to be a philosopher in that area. And moral philosophy, ethics and law, you need to understand ethics and law and so on. Okay? So as you can see, if someone wants to be a philosopher, first they need to understand epistemology, which is how to engage with science and scientific knowledge. And then, to meet the metaphysics part of this, they need like 4 or 5 different master's degrees. Okay? Or the equivalent reading, right? And just so you know, a master's degree, you read about 250 different pieces of literature on average, throughout a master's degree. Okay, so you need to be reading over 1,000 pieces of academic literature, books and papers and so on, just to understand the world to the point where you can philosophize about it. Okay? Now, just to share, I've read, I would estimate, over the last 10 years as a scholar, I've read about 1,500 to 2,000 pieces of academic literature in all of these different fields. I've authored about 10 books on these issues, on what I've found and so on. And you can find that on my website. I've talked about it in other videos on my YouTube channel. Okay, so I've done the work that's required to be a philosopher in this generation. Okay, if I go to the philosophy department at my old university, McMaster, I don't want to pick on them, but I went there. If I go to the philosophy department and I say, how many books and papers in psychology have you read? And they'll say, oh, well, like, I don't really study that. I study Schopenhauer, right? I study Plato. Okay, and then it's like, okay, like, do you know who Suzanne Cook-Greuter is? Do you know who Jane Loevinger is? No. Well, no, I haven't heard of them. Okay, Abraham Maslow and his hierarchy of needs. Have you read any of Abraham Maslow's books? Well, no, right? But then they go and teach philosophy related to society, and they haven't engaged with psychology, human motivation, and so on, right? Or history, right? We'll use history as an example because it's not even like technically a science. Okay. If I go to the philosophy department at McMaster and I say, okay, so one of the most one of the most you know impactful manifestos ever written in the modern era was unfortunately Mein Kampf. How many of you have actually read Mein Kampf, or at least perused part of it? You know, I doubt that most people in the philosophy department will have read that technically important historical document. Now, just so you guys don't get freaked out during my rant, I'm a Noahide, and which means that I'm part of ultra Orthodox Judaism. Okay, even I have read the first 200 pages of Kampf. Okay, as someone in the Jewish world, I've engaged with the topic. Have even history professors at McMaster perused that document? Probably not, right? Certainly not the philosophy department. And I'm not saying there's anything of value in it. I'm just saying that it's important to be aware of what was written in the document so we can understand history and so on. But anyway, that tangent aside, what I'm pointing out to you is that the people who engage in philosophy of any kind have not met the table stakes required for epistemology. They certainly have not met the table stakes required for metaphysics. Okay? Which is an understanding of psychology, neuroscience, sociology, anthropology, history, economics, comparative theology, ethics, and law. They don't get it. But then, based on their anemic knowledge of what the world is like, they decide that they want to do philosophy. And so what they actually do is they start with aesthetics, which is what they consciously or unconsciously prefer to be true. They start with what they want, which is a narcissistic approach. What I want, regardless of what the world is like, regardless what is true about human psychology, regardless what is true about history or economics or anything, I want something to be true, so I'm going to start there. And then, after they start with aesthetics, what they value, they then cobble together an epistemology, which is a set of assumptions that they make about truth-seeking. And then, once they cobble together an epistemology, their metaphysics consists of cherry-picking evidence to support their narcissism. And then, once they finish cherry-picking whatever they want to be true, then they start proselytizing about ethics. Okay? It's backwards. It's disordered thinking. It's disordered thinking. Most philosophers today and throughout history have not put in the groundwork required to understand the reality that they are philosophizing about. They have not bothered. Okay, and many philosophers, especially the people teaching in various universities, they are too arrogant to admit that they don't actually know very much about the world and probably have no right to be philosophizing about it. Okay? And as someone who has a physics degree, as someone who's read between 1,500 and 2,000 different pieces of academic literature, it's an outrage to me. It's an outrage to me. It's crazy. I can't believe that people do that. I genuinely can't believe it. Okay? And so anyway, that is where philosophy is mostly a waste of time. Okay? If you are doing a PhD in Schopenhauer or Kant or something, okay, you are doing a PhD picking apart the bones of someone else's opinion from the 1700s or 1800s. You're picking apart opinions. Okay? If you are studying Bertrand Russell or Michel Foucault or anything, you are picking apart the bones of their opinions. Okay? You're not actually understanding the world. You're not actually having ordered thoughts about the world and so on. You're just picking apart opinions. And so, like, modern psychology especially, or modern philosophy especially, is a carrion pile of vulture professors who are picking apart the bones of dead men, generally, and not bothering to understand the world that they're philosophizing about. Okay? It's crazy. It's crazy. It's a waste of time. It's a waste of time. If you want to be a philosopher, okay, read 250 works in psychology. Read history extensively. Study archaeology. Study sociology, and so on. Study all of those things. And then once you understand what's going on, then start philosophizing. Okay? So anyway, that's my rant about why most philosophy is a waste of time. You know, to sum everything up, as I've said before, you have to engage with philosophy in a certain order. Epistemology, figuring out how to figure out stuff. Figuring out how to figure out what's true. Then once you've got your methods down, you can go to metaphysics, which is understanding the world. Once you understand the world, you will be able to discern what is important, which is aesthetics. And then once you've discerned what's important, then you can decide what to do and how to live a good life. Okay? Most philosophers throughout history, and especially today, have not done that. And especially in our scientific age and so on, the table stakes are so high. The table stakes are so high that most people are either unwilling or unable to meet them. Okay? And instead, we pick apart the bones of dead people and dissect their opinions and form opinions of our own without regard to reality. Okay? And unfortunately, that is narcissism. Okay, so now, I don't want to present a problem without presenting a solution. I don't want to present a problem without presenting a solution. And so, as I promised, I'm going to share with you how to become a true philosopher. Okay? So, the first step in becoming a true philosopher is figuring out how to think good. Okay, you want to have high quality thoughts. You want to be able to think good. And so I've actually put together some resources on this. In addition to all my research, I have 10 years of experience in education at the post-secondary level and so on. And so I've put together a guided journal called Thinking with Integrity. This is about critical thinking. Okay, it builds critical thinking skills. I also have a guided journal called Wise Mind, which is related to various mental skills, cognitive skills that you need related to wisdom. Okay, so once you've done those two journals, okay, that might take like 3 weeks or so, if you have extra time, maybe 3-4 weeks. Okay, once you've done those, you can start gaining knowledge about the world. Okay, and on my website, I've got a free download. I've got a guided journal, like a free guided journal, but most relevant to you, I've got this resource called Big Ideas. 53 underappreciated books that will transform your perspective. What I've done is I've gone through my 1,500, 2,000 work reading list, and I've selected the 53 most impactful books. Okay? Not just impactful for me, but like objectively perspective changing, discipline relevant books. Okay, so I've selected 53 books that you can go through. Okay, so once you've done these two journals and you've read those 53 books, your brain is going to be bursting out of your skull. You're gonna have such a big brain. Okay, and so that's what I would recommend. Okay, first you have to build the mental skills that you need in order to navigate various things, and then the 53 books that I've recommended, you plow through those. You are going to be seeing the world in a way different way, in a way deeper way. Now, I've also written a book which has 1,000 references. Okay, this is a double PhD dissertation. Average PhD dissertation is 500 references or so. This has 1,000. Okay, it's called Ticket to Heaven: Towards the Unity of Knowledge, the Destruction of Idols, the Reclamation of Western Thought, the Realization of the American Dream, the Final Answer to the Jewish Question, and Utopia. Okay, what I've done with this book is I wrote down everything that I've discovered across all of my research. I've put it in order. Okay, I take people on a specific mental journey, and the journey includes sociology, critique of modern society, psychology, neuroscience, sociology, ethics, theology. Okay, I talk about Judaism in this book, obviously, and also aesthetics. Okay, so I cover a lot of ground in this book, and I lay it out in a specific order. And so if you read this book, okay, you don't necessarily have to read the 1,500, 2,000 pieces of literature that I have. I've distilled them and condensed them and put it into this book, okay, which should save you some time. And all the references are cited. There's 100 quotes and notes in the back, so you can read a little bit more deeper if you want. And of course, the references, you can go straight to the sources, okay? So that's what I would recommend. That's what I would recommend. First, you got to get your mind right, which, I've got guided journals for. Then you got to understand the world, which I've got 53 book recommendations for, plus this book, which will save you some time. And then once you've done that, you are in a position to start philosophizing, But what it deeply troubles me that most people in most philosophy departments have not met those table stakes. Makes no sense to me. Now, there is one final thing I'll say if you've made it this far. I never wanted to become a philosopher. I never wanted to become a philosopher. Okay? But why am I a philosopher? And the answer is because when I was younger and growing up and everything, and, even as a teenager or in my 20s or whatever, there were so many people out there on the internet, in my life, whatever, right, who claimed to have the correct view on things. Like on YouTube, for example, you've got the conservative influencers and the liberal influencers and the Christian apologists and the Muslim apologists and all of these people, right? And they have these elaborate philosophies as to why they're correct. Okay? And so I genuinely was like, wow, like all of these people seem super confident. I guess I should look into this because they're confident about it. They've got these elaborate justifications. Like, I got to give all of these things the benefit of the doubt. Liberalism, I got to look into liberal philosophy. Conservatism, got to look into that philosophy. Christian apologists, I've got to look into Christian theology and so on. So it's like I actually gave all of these people the benefit of the doubt. And I realized, over time, that they were committing the kinds of errors that I've discussed in this video. They didn't nail down their epistemology. They didn't nail down their metaphysics. Okay? And so on. And so I became a philosopher, I suppose, almost as a defense mechanism, as a psychological defense mechanism to protect myself from all of the bad ideas that are out there in the world. Okay, I never wanted to become a philosopher. I want to do other things with my life, and I am doing other things with my life, but I never wanted this. It's just there are so many people out there who refuse to think in an ordered way. Okay, and a lot of these people are very popular, and it troubles me, right? And so, in order for me to be confident in how I move through the world, and in order for me to have answers when people challenge me on things, I had to become a philosopher. Okay, and interestingly, once I understood how the world worked and how people worked, I like I realized that it's better not to have many of those discussions. Okay, so for example, and it's like, what do I mean by that? Okay, if you go on my YouTube channel, okay, you will find informational videos. Okay, I've got psychology, neuroscience, I've got philosophy, I've got evidence for the Torah, I've got a bunch of videos on Kabbalah, other biblical study videos. Okay, what you will not see me do is arguing and picking fights with Christian influencers or atheist influencers or Islamic influencers. Okay? And to be honest, that is where I would get thousands or tens of thousands of views. If I started swinging on the internet, okay, and picking fights with religious influencers and political influencers, my channel would be a lot bigger than it is right now. I guarantee you. Okay? And I know that because I used to make a couple of videos like that and got tens of thousands of views on it. Like, I had one video go low-key viral. I've since deleted it because now that I understand kind of practical psychology, this whole thing of how people start with what they want to be true and so on, most people online, most influencers online, most philosophy professors and university professors in general, it's not unintentional on their part. Okay? People who proselytize for a political or religious viewpoint or a philosophical viewpoint, like people who are influencers online who are engaging with philosophy in a disordered way, I've realized it's not unintentional. It's not unintentional. Okay, what I mean by that is intentional. They are either actively deceiving themselves, which takes a lot of effort to do, or they know what they're up to and they're actively deceiving other people. I've realized there's no point in debating with those people. There's no point in debating with those people. Okay? And so I've made this video, like, in case you're interested in philosophy, I've made this video kind of as a warning, partially for those people who might be honestly misled. Okay? A lot of people out there who are advocating for one idea or another idea or whatever, they are not good faith actors. They are not acting in good faith. Okay? And it took me many years of research and many life experiences to realize that they're not acting in good faith. And the best thing that I could do is focus on my own life, So, like, in my job, for example, I'm a chief marketing officer of a company, right? So, I've got a career that I'm focusing on. And in my spare time, I'm designing tabletop role-playing games, which is my passion. Okay? I'm not engaging in debate YouTube. It's not where I want to be spending my time. Dealing with people who are operating in bad faith, opening myself up to getting swatted, getting doxxed, whatever, like, It's not worth it. It's not worth it. Okay. So anyway, I've ranted for long enough. Again, if you want to be a true philosopher, you need to build the mental skills. Got to build the fundamentals. Okay. Thinking with Integrity, Wise Mind. That's where you start. The 53 books I have on my website, you can continue with that. And if you want to cause your brain to melt out of your ears, check out Ticket to Heaven. It's my finest work, I would argue. So anyway, thank you very much for watching my rant. Sorry it was 35 minutes, but like, seeing how the world is and how philosophy departments operate and how YouTube influencers operate, like, thinking about how ridiculous it all is, it gives me chest pains. It gives me chest pains. And so I suppose this is, you know, as Nietzsche said, it is an unconscious autobiography, or a conscious autobiography, and a confession. And the confession is that I am disgusted by most philosophy. I believe it's an absolute, utter waste of time. Most of the people engaging in philosophy are bad faith actors, if not outright narcissists. And it makes me sad that myself and other well-meaning people get caught up in these webs of ideas. And, you know, in my case, I had to read 1,500, 2,000 pieces of literature and think about them for 10 years in order to see past all the nonsense. Okay. Anyway, thanks very much for watching this video. Hope you enjoyed it.